Mondo, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for those listening, we're going to be talking about an interesting topic, and I'm sure you've seen this. I know you reported on it, Andy, in the sense of they're coming this fall, September 18th and 19th, that the UN is having this summit, which is a summit kind of re-engaging the nations, or they're trying to re-engage the nations going back to the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, where an article came out on June 13th. So I'll just read this first paragraph to set the stage. The title is, this is from the UN.org. So this is straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. The title is, we need 7 years of accelerated transformative action to achieve the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And it's dated June 13th, and it says, almost 8 years have passed since the international community agreed to take bold and transformative steps to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a plan of action to secure the rights and well-being of everyone on a healthy, thriving planet. Today, at the halfway point to 2030, that promise is in peril, and a fundamental shift is needed in commitment, solidarity, financing, and action to put the world on a better path, and it is needed now. So for those that maybe they're hearing about this for the first time, what in the world are they talking about here?
Well, it's interesting because it shows you these one-worlders are at least thinking in 7-year increments. And we know from Daniel 9:27 that whether this is that, we don't know yet, but there is coming a 7-year treaty, in this case between the Antichrist and unbelieving Israel. So they're thinking in 7-year increments. It's just, in this case, it's a little different. They're it looks to me like they're making a pact with all of the nations to kind of bring in these, what are they called? SDGs, yes. Sustainable Development Goals. And so there's some interesting parallels with Bible prophecy.
See, I think that's what I see is one of the reasons I wanted to address this is you have this agreement from 2015. So even there, they weren't thinking in 7 years; they were thinking in 15-year increments. It just happens to be that with COVID happening over the past few years, they've seen some increases, some speed up, and they're realizing, man, we need to take advantage. You hear some of them. We need to take advantage of what we've had here as it relates to some of the fear mongering and the crises. It's always a crisis, right? So they are regrouping. And it just happens to be right now in 2023. But I think for those that are prophecy watchers, all of us are, that when we see the UN say anything with a 7-year time frame, it brings up the hairs on our head. I mean, doesn't it? Shouldn't it? I mean, why not?
Well, sure. I mean, Bible prophecy predicts a one world government headed by an Antichrist. And apparently at some point he's going to enter into a peace treaty with the nation of Israel, guaranteeing her security. So today when we talk about globalists or one-worlders, that's what these SDGs are. They're wanting to bring all 17 of these things into existence through the solution, and I put that in quotes,
right,
through the solution of one world government. When the big guns talk about 7-year treaties, we say, well, that's a very interesting similarity with what I know is coming in Bible prophecy.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I would like to do is to compare what we're seeing with this article, again, June 13th, and their connection with what they're hoping to accomplish, and then try to take what they're saying here and then to see if what is happening there matches what we see in Daniel 9:27, and whether, I mean, this isn't an official. The Paris Climate Agreement, again, that started in 2015. So some of the goals that they have here, it says in their report, of the roughly 140 targets with data, only about 12% are on track to be achieved by 2030. Close to half, though showing progress, are moderately or severely off track, and some 30% have either seen no movement or regressed below the 2015 baseline. Giving up on the Sustainable Development Goals or extending the deadline, presumably past 2030, to meet them is not an option. The world has been rocked by a series of interlinked crises, the COVID-19 pandemic, conflict, the climate crisis, and a weak global economy. Recommitting to the 2030 agenda is the best roadmap out of these crises, but we are fast running out of time to correct course. So this, it reminds me of Rahm Emanuel, you know, right? Never let a crisis go to waste.
Exactly.
They have these ideas. We don't know anybody's heart. Well, I don't read hearts. I'm sure there might be some that mean well, but we do know that the world lies under the power of the wicked one.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me kind of your thoughts here, you know, in the sense of this re-engagement, that, you know, using recommitment.
Well, to be frank with you, if I was not a Bible student and a Bible prophecy advocate, and I didn't know anything about Bible prophecy, to me, what they say makes sense. I mean, it does make sense that we should have, let's just leave the Bible out of it for a second. Just from a humanistic perspective, world government makes sense to the human mind because we have all of these potential nuclear weapons around the world. Why not just isolate them and put them in one person's hands, and we've saved our planet? The problem is the Bible tells us at the Tower of Babel, and it tells us concerning the prophecies about the Antichrist, the end of the age, that if you get world government and it falls into the wrong person's hands, as God said in the book of Genesis chapter 11, nothing will be impossible for them. And there he's talking about the potential for evil. So as a biblicist, when I see the powers that be grabbing the strings of global government, I'm saying that's not good, number one, because eventually this centralized power prophetically is going to fall into the wrong person's hands. And number two, this is certainly stage setting for the things that are on the horizon concerning Bible prophecy. I don't think prophecies are such that they're fulfilled in a vacuum. If you just go back to the first coming prophecies, the stage was all set for those first coming prophecies. And if the stage can be set for the first advent of Jesus, why can't I see it being set for the second advent of Jesus? And so when I see these interesting similarities, that's how I categorize it. I categorize it as stage setting, you know, ultimately concerning what's to come, because the stage has to be set well in advance, you know, for the fulfillment of God's prophetic word. That's what I think is happening in our world.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say that we don't go from living in Mayberry one day to the full Antichrist system the next, right? I mean, it takes, in here, in many ways, if you put Mayberry back in the 50s, just, you know, whatever, it takes a couple generations of stage setting. And if you like what you just said is great. Going back to the first century, I think God began the stage setting of the Messianic era of the first, going with Alexander the Great, the Hellenization, right? I mean, we have Greek God established it 300 years so that when the gospel did go out, it'd be easy to go out. And even Rome coming in and the census and everything. I mean, these are world powers, and God's like, yeah, I'm stage setting this because my son's coming.
Yeah, right down to the piercing, because Zechariah 12:10, Isaiah 53 verse 5, Psalm 22, verse 16, all say his hands and he'll be pierced. The psalmist is more clear that his hands and feet will be pierced. Well, the Jews didn't pierce people.
They didn't crucify people.
They executed them through stoning. So Rome, under Pompey, about 63 BC, coming into the land of Israel, taking away from the Jews the right to execute their own criminals and popularizing what the Assyrians had invented, the crucifixion. As all of that comes into place, that's the Lord moving his hand in preparation for the piercing of his son. So if something like that can happen for the first advent, clearly we're seeing this kind of thing preparatory for the second advent. Especially
because when we look, I tend to think, and oftentimes we see, there's a difference between I think a prophecy, which prophecy often is a snapshot. Boom, Revelation 13, there's a snapshot of this global government that has instituted a mark of the beast, and you're like, okay, and then it steps away. But you're like, well, how did it get there? Again, it just didn't happen overnight. So now you have generations, even going back to 1947 with or even the the establishment of the United Nations itself, moving from the League of Nations. I mean, even before Israel.
Yeah.
So you have that idea of needing or precipitating a world government going way back.
And I think the mistake that a lot of our camp makes that are very enthusiastic about prophecy, and we should be enthusiastic about Bible prophecy, but the mistake we make is we say this is that. In other words, we confuse stage setting with an actual fulfillment. And that's where we start saying things like, well, this coming UN conference is the peace treaty with Israel. We don't know that yet. And therefore, the rapture has to happen at a particular point to precede these 7 years. Well, we don't know that yet either. I mean, we don't know how long the stage setting is going to happen, before we move into specific fulfillment. So I think we're confusing a lot of times stage setting with fulfillment.
Especially, again, the motive is, hey, I hear, I'm excited.
Sure.
I'm excited. So to see the stage setting is really exciting. But then, some people they're very careful, which is very wise, to say, well, I'm not saying that the rapture is going to be between now and then, or that is, like you said, that is. But nevertheless, sometimes there's a high level of implying it.
Yes.
And which leads people to, let's talk about that for a moment. Some people are like, well, I never said it was the exact fulfillment, but there's a strong level of implication. And then, so people get excited, and maybe I think let's ask that question. I mean, you're a pastor, I pastored a long time. We look out for the different levels of people in the church, different levels of maturity, spiritual understanding, all the different, and as a shepherd, you sometimes you have to bring it down to the least common denominator. But there's levels of maturity there. So if we say something that potentially could be careless, they're going to run with, well, so-and-so said or implied. We might have a way out, say, oh, I didn't say that. You go, but they left with the flavor that, man, September 18th, that's the covenant. That is the covenant of Daniel 9:27. And then September 25th comes, and October 5th comes, and then it leaves them with what?
Well, if we're not distinguishing like we are here between fulfillment and stage setting, and we're giving people the impression that the prophecies have to be fulfilled at a specific time, and start attaching dates, or as you say, leaning towards certain dates, giving ourselves a little wiggle room. I love what you said. What are we doing for the immature believers in the church? I mean, we're really setting them up for disappointment and disillusionment. It's a lot like the pro-life movement when a pro-lifer goes off the rails and shoots a doctor or an abortionist. What does that do to the pro-life movement? It sets it back, I would think, a couple of decades. That's what we do when we don't distinguish stage setting from actual fulfillment. We take our whole dispensational eschatological group, and we just lose credibility, not only in the eyes of Christendom, but in the eyes of the unbelieving world.
Yeah. And I think I had a friend of mine who, I went to school with him. And so this is probably 2008 in graduate school. And I said, he's like, oh, you're a prophecy guy? And back then I go, yeah, man, I'm excited. I mean, and he goes, yeah, he grew up in a Baptist church. Everything's pre-trib, and he goes, man, you guys, I say this in a nice way, but I just got tired of the burnout. I mean, it's like everything that happened, it was this. And again, probably whatever mistakes were happening in whoever was teaching, they were mistaking the fulfillment for the stage setting, as you just said, that very good distinction. But for him, whatever led him there, he's given up on watching it all now, because he just said, I can't take the burnout. Yeah. So how do we keep watching? Jesus told us to watch, right? That's what I say to you. I say to all, watch. Mark 13:37. How do we keep watching without getting burned out?
Yeah. One of the greatest comments I've ever heard or read in print on this is by the late Charles Ryrie. He said, prophecy, the field of eschatology, is damaged by its friends and its foes alike. The foes who read too little into it. And we all know movements that have moved into allegorization, replacement theology, and they just ascribe no significance to these end time events. And then he said it's equally damaged by people that read too much into it. and cross the line and maybe start intimating at specific fulfillment dates, which is only going to lead to disillusionment. And so that's the balancing act that we are in as we're doing this kind of ministry. We're not allegorists. We believe that these prophecies will happen in real time, but we're not going to go beyond what Scripture says and start ascribing and assigning dates that the Bible doesn't do. And so that's a tough balancing act. But we have to do it to stay credible, I believe.
So we all know the phraseology of, or even the idea of imminence. But even Matthew 24:36, no one knows the day or the hour. Was that true only in the time that Jesus said it, and now we can know, or is that true for all time, that no one will ever know exactly?
My understanding of it is no one will know exactly.
Ever?
Well, once you hit the 7-year tribulation period and the actual treaty is entered into, people that understand the word will know, because they'll
2,520 days, right?
And particularly when the temple is desecrated, they will know. But we're not in that time period yet, So I think the best we can say is, we're in the general season of the Lord's return. There are things happening in our world that are absolutely unprecedented, and I don't think there's any problem bringing that to people's attention. I mean, just to give you one example, the 2 witnesses killed in Jerusalem. It says in Revelation 11, around verse 8, that the whole world is going to watch this.
Yeah.
And then they're going to be resuscitated and brought into heaven, and the whole world is going to watch and be astonished. Well, 100 years ago, how is that even possible? And it's kind of funny to watch older commentators trying to make sense of that. Well, we don't have to wonder anymore at all what that means. We know exactly what it means because we have all the technology. We can go to websites right now and look at live feeds of things happening in the temple area in the city of Jerusalem.
Webcams are everywhere now.
Yeah, so I can look at that and say, we're certainly in the season of the fulfillment of end time events. Now, as to specific dates, like when people kind of corner off part of the year as, okay, this is high alert time, I'm wondering, well, what do you do with the rest of the year? Is the rest of the year not high alert time? Because as I understand the Bible prophecy, every day is high alert time because the rapture is an imminent event. And so I think it's, crossing the line to me is going beyond just the prophetic season and moving into specifics that the Bible doesn't give. That's where we get into trouble.
Yeah, that is when we start saying, we understand the feasts, Colossians 2:16, the feasts are a shadow, and Jesus fulfilled the first feast. We see that, the spring feasts. But when they start, when I've heard, again, that framework is there. I think Jesus died, unleavened bread, Passover, Feast of First Fruits fulfilled. Even the church on Pentecost, I see that. That's pretty obvious. But as I've read a variety of things of people looking at the fall feasts, trumpets, Yom Kippur, and tabernacles, I haven't seen anything that I felt that was satisfying of how exactly that would work tightly for the second coming, the rapture, the tribulation. And there's like, the day, the Yom Kippur is representative of the tribulation. Well, that's interesting because it's a single day, and now we're extrapolating it to 7 years. We didn't do that for the first feasts. They were on a specific day. That wasn't extrapolated out. So I mean, have you seen anything that you would think is very tight and nice?
Well, I like your terminology, tight, because I have 2 cars in my garage. They look very similar. They both have a steering wheel and seat belts and an engine, but it's an error to say car A equals car B. So one of the logical fallacies you can commit is you say similarity equals equality. And I see that a lot in our prophecy circles is people are looking at similarities, and there's some very fascinating similarities, but until those prophecies actually happen, you can't say it's equality. No one has that ability to do that.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I love conjecturing.
Sure.
But to see it, it's a little I think it's not satisfying. I don't find it fully compelling. Looking historically, compelling. There it is. Even 1 Corinthians 5:7. Now, Jesus is our Passover lamb. Great. Mm-hmm. He's the first fruits, right? So we see that. Let's transition here for a minute because, so we have this upcoming meeting. September 18th. It's happening. It's starting the day after Rosh Hashanah ends on September 17th. I'll read this last thing, and then this is a quote from their June article. It says, this is what they're recommending in these 17 different sustainable goals. It says at the global level, a once-in-a-generation commitment is needed to overhaul the international financial and economic system so that it responds to today's challenges, not those of the 1940s. It is essential that countries have the resources needed at scale to invest in both their immediate recovery and in long-term sustainable development outcomes, including climate action. A surge in SDG financing is needed with a SDG stimulus of $500 billion per year, with simultaneous reforms of the international financial architecture. There's a lot here, to make it resilient, equitable, and accessible for all. It is also critical that developing countries have better access to global trade, science, technology, and innovation. Unprecedented collaboration among Group G20 members will be needed to support developing countries to advance SDG and climate action. It's not too late to turn this around. So here, they're talking about overhauling financial and economic system. Mm-hmm. What do you think that? Let's speculate. Let's have a little fun here. What do you think this is referring to? What are their goals here?
Well, the ultimate name of the game when you're talking about globalists is you want to erase the doctrine of the nation state. In other words, their thinking is our problems are global in nature, so they're not going to be resolved through individual nations. So ultimately they want to do is bring in kind of a suprastructure, a transnational structure that the other nations of the earth have to acquiesce to. And supposedly we all have to do this because our problems are global in nature and the only solution is global government. And so it's a way really to consolidate power into fewer and fewer hands.
Mm-hmm. And I think here, as we've seen, this to me, this reeks of the Great Reset.
Yeah.
To overhaul the international and economic system is to respond to today's challenges. So what I just read was we need to reset it because in order to respond to what they deem are the crises, the fear-mongering that they just spent on the first part of it, we got to reset everything. Mm-hmm. And economically, financial and economics, you're like, well, that sure sounds interesting. That economics appears in Revelation 13, which we see as that snapshot as the end. Yep. But again, the stage setting, how does it get there? Well, we all believe that snapshot of Revelation 13 is most likely a cashless or digital type system or something, at least cashless, economic. But how do you get there? Obliterating, that's my word, or overhauling. We see that's what's going on now, right? With CBDCs, mm-hmm. With the Fed now, that's just one government part of it. They really do need to get rid of cash, right?
Yeah, I mean, the citizen has to shrink in terms of privacy, autonomy. The state has to grow. So all these things you're reading about here is pushing us, in that direction. Now, this, we want to be clear, is not the mark of the beast.
Correct.
Because we don't have the beast yet.
Yep.
My understanding is that system is not really fully functional, or let me put it this way, up and running until the second half of the tribulation period, basically. But as we said earlier, prophecies can't be fulfilled in a vacuum. I mean, you can't go from a independent and prosperous America where citizens have autonomy and freedom mm-hmm. to that kind of system that we're talking about in Revelation 13 without a stage setting transitional period. So that's the category I put these things in. It's inching us. Maybe that's not even the best word because seems to be happening pretty quick. But
Footing us?
we're being, what was it? Cass Sunstein in the Obama administration has the book called Nudge. We're being nudged in this globalist direction. I think the CEO of BlackRock, the tape that surfaced in 2017, where he basically made a statement that people have to be forced into correct behavior.
Yep,
we're being pushed, nudged, whatever word you want to use, into this system that ultimately will become the mark of the beast system.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, we have, for those listening, we have this snapshot of the end of, or the snapshot of a system in place, but then going back, that these are all just part of the stage setting.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not saying that this is the mark of the beast or this is Revelation 13. Clearly it's not, but the snapshot we have, we extrapolate backwards and we go, oh, this idea of overhauling the financial system, we think, well, that certainly would make sense of how they would do that, so that when that time, which we see is Revelation 13, this is where a lot of that begins. So let's talk a little bit about. We've kind of laid the foundation for this conference that's coming up, this UN conference that is seeking to reaffirm, their words, recommit, based on the 2015 Paris Agreement. So for 7 years. So in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, this is where I think some people are making some parallels. And my question is, okay, let's just see. The fact is September 18th. This is what they're doing. They have the recommitment. They have a 7-year goal to reach 2030. Does this match what we would expect from an exegetical perspective in Daniel 9:27, where I'll read it here? It just says, this is the ESV, "He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. On the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator." So you have the New King James. Maybe read the New King James and see how we have a little bit of variation there.
Yeah, it says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate."
So we have some similarities. We have some differences there. But I think let's start out with what we're answering today is, or we're trying to, is this prophecy in Daniel 9:27, could it be fulfilled by the United Nations making this recommitment with the nations of the world for 7 years? Are they similar? First of all, I would say from an exegetical perspective, what's the context? We have a covenant with the many. It's clear in Hebrew, la. But what's the context here? Who's this covenant with, and who's making it? Going back to even verse 24, help us out.
Yeah, I think the many is Israel. If you go over to Daniel 11:33, I think you'll see that the many there is defined as the nation of Israel. So when people are saying this many is these conglomeration of nations that the UN is pushing towards these SDGs, I don't think this passage and what we see happening there is exactly the same. Furthermore, when you go back to Daniel 9:24, and what people need to understand is God gave to Israel a clock. 483 of the 490 years have expired, leaving 7 years left for the nation of Israel. That's our whole logic for believing in a future 7-year tribulation period. And when God entered into that clock with Israel, as Daniel, way back in the 6th century, during the days of the Babylonian captivity, was given this 490-year stopwatch, as I'll call it, it says very clearly in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, that this is given, 77s, 490 years, in other words, are determined for your people and your holy city. So who was Daniel's people? Israel. Who was his city? Jerusalem. So unless this 7-year issue that we're talking about here with the United Nations specifically relates to Israel and the city of Jerusalem, which as far as I can tell, it does not.
Not specifically.
We're not in a position to say this is that.
Yeah, I think that, as you said, there's a similarity there's some similarity of language. I would say really they're not calling it a covenant for sure, but that's okay. They're calling it an agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement from 2015. I tend to look at this and say I'll be stronger. I'll speak for Mondo in that I think what's happening in September 17th and 18th it's not even possible that this could be a fulfillment of Daniel 9:27 because of what we just said. Is that number one, unless that day comes and they say this is specifically targeting Israel, there's nothing in this little thing that we read about that agreement specifically targeting Israel and the city of Jerusalem and the people of Israel. Then you'd have to say, well, is it the UN Secretary General? Because there's a he, it's a singular, right? There's going to be this one singular individual, not a plurality of agreements, right? So there's several things that weigh against that even being possible.
Right.
Unless somehow the information that we get about that fall conference changes, which hypothetically, I suppose one guy could arise out of there and say, heck with all the other nations, I want this agreement to be with Israel for 7 years. That would be the only way I could say that it would be even possible to be fulfilled.
Right. I mean, you use the language tightening up. There has to be a lot more tightening between now and then. However, stage setting, global government, 7-year increments. Seems like we're inching closer to what the Bible says, but we can't say this is that.
Yeah. And it's interesting too that there's, I guess in my mind, we got to remember that the original covenant was 15 years. So they didn't really have anything significant about 7. It just happens to be that right now they're taking advantage of the current geopolitical climate to say, let's reaffirm it. Now, could this be, if we're being very broad and generous, if they talk about 7 years here and then maybe later they like the 7-year idea and the Antichrist likes the 7-year idea, because they've used it before back in 2023, whatever that means. Could that stage set in their thinking of a 7-year? Maybe. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening now could evolve further into what the Bible says, and I think that's what we keep seeing with all these stage setting things. That's the reason they're so interesting to us. Is they don't seem to make a U-turn and go back the opposite direction. I mean, just the development of technology. You talked earlier about a cashless society. We're not moving further and further away from that idea.
No,
we're getting closer and closer. That's why all this stuff is so intriguing. It's just in our camp, we have a lot of enthusiasts that haven't been taught the difference between stage setting and fulfillment. And they're making unwarranted conclusions is what I think is happening.
And sometimes, you use the word intimate. I think that's oftentimes it's like, well, I didn't say it. Like, yeah, but you intimated it. And I know if I say to my wife something and I'll leave myself out the caveat, I could say, well, I didn't say that. She goes, yeah, but you intimated it. You're just as guilty, in that regard. Let me ask you this question, because one of the things that comes down in the Daniel 9:27 comes down really to the first word that you have there, coming from gavar, this idea of strong or to strengthen. It's very unique. It's in a Hiphil, for those that want to know. It's a Hebrew Hiphil. It only appears one other time in Psalm 12:5. So some versions, like again, the New King James says he will confirm a covenant. The ESV says he shall make. The linguistics of that vary twice. It only appears twice. Can we be dogmatic either way on whether it means confirm something original or to make something that would be original? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think you could be dogmatic, because I've heard preachers, prophecy teachers say what has to happen is you have to strengthen something that already exists.
Pre-existed, yeah.
You have to make it stronger. Well, I would be much more comfortable saying that's an option.
Yeah.
That's a possibility, but there's other possibilities exegetically and linguistically as well.
Yeah.
The way I'm understanding prophecy is, I know this is not in chapter 9, but over in chapter 12, he talks there about many will go to and fro, and knowledge will increase. Now, I'm understanding going to and fro is reading. You're reading to and fro. And knowledge is increasing. Knowledge of what? Knowledge of the prophetic word. In other words, prophecy by God's design is meant to get clearer and clearer the closer and closer you move towards the fulfillment of those events. So our generation knows a lot more about it than a past generation, not because we're smarter. We're living at the right point in time.
We have more correlations, with what we see.
Should the Lord tarry, the next generation will understand it a lot better than we will. And certainly the people in the tribulation period itself, because we know that there will be people converted post-rapture, will understand it way better than all of us.
They're going to have all Andy Wood's books. They're going to be able to say, I want to go find his library.
Right. And so I call this, and I'm real careful about it, this is not progressive revelation, because revelation's been given. The books of the Bible have been written. It's our understanding of them, particularly in eschatology, prophecy, increases as you get closer and closer to the end. So with all of that being said, that's why we have to hold on to loosely some of these things we see in the world. I mean, we may see part of the picture, but not the whole picture yet, because we're not living in the exact right amount, increment of time. So it's just a matter of being somewhat humble about it, and not dogmatizing.
I would totally agree, because I think that's why I was asking: is this required to mean a reaffirmation of a pre-existing? And I think it doesn't. That's very important. One commentary, the way that, again, a lot of people they talk about the nature of this particular Hebrew word in this particular sense, but this person wrote, the idea of making, it's forcing an agreement by means of superior strength. And even the Paul Tanner commentary, it says this, looking at some of this, it says the Hiphil then might mean something like he will cause a covenant to be strong, because it is a causative, that's what the Hiphil does, or great for the many. This does not seem to lend support to the idea that the covenant itself is strong, much less that he confirms. Rather, the idea seems to be that he strongly establishes a covenant with the many, or perhaps that he enforces a covenant. This receives some support from the Septuagint, the Theodotion. So the second thing too, let's just kind of summarize here. So we're saying that the text is saying that we can't be dogmatic on that it's a reaffirmation of a pre-existing covenant. It can be, but then secondly, the many, la ravim in Hebrew, only appears in Daniel 11:33. So who is the many? I think that's a little stronger linguistically, especially if we keep it in the book of Daniel. Yeah. This phrase only appears like 7 times in the whole Old Testament as it relates to that construction. But Daniel 11:33 clearly is referring to Jews.
Right. And when you do word studies, it's you're working your way outward.
Yes.
So obviously examining the same word has the most potency inside the same book written by the same author.
Yep.
Particularly if it's in this same context.
Yeah, and 2 chapters later, it's pretty much in the it's close. Yeah.
It's in the prophetic, generally the prophetic section. Well, that should carry the most weight. Now, once you've established that, it's okay of drifting outward further. I noticed you had Esther and some Isaiah and some others, and you could take those into account, but you hold on to those a little bit more loosely.
Yes, exactly.
And so that's why I think the many here is not, some kind of agreement with all the nations. It's more focused on Israel.
Yeah. So I guess if as we kind of wrap this up in thinking about what's coming this fall, stage setting for sure, contributing to the overall end game that we see in the prophetic snapshots, not only of Revelation, but of others. But I think my encouragement is to people is think in terms of a new believer or even an unbeliever, that we need to be super, super careful not to even really intimate things and not leave ourselves out this caveat. Well, I didn't say it specifically. I think that's
right.
That's unhealthy. I've seen the damage that it does.
I have too.
Yeah. I mean, and we how many people, I mean, we've seen it over and over, those watching going back to 88 Reasons.
That's right. That's right.
You know, the other book, I got saved in 1993, and the first book, it was like 1994. This is it. And I got pretty excited. And then it was, you know, the year 2000, and then it was 2012, and then it was, 2011 with the Harold Camping.
Yep.
And we see so many people get burned out.
Yeah. In fact, I was teaching at the local Bible college at the time, and it was around that time when Harold Camping's prophecies were popular. And the students asked me what I thought about those, and I went up to my office and got his 1994 book.
Yeah, exactly.
This is 2011. I go, here's what I think of Harold Camping's prophecies. He's crossed the line. He's no longer dealing with stage setting. He's moved into specific areas that God has given us no revelation on concerning dates and timing. Stage setting, I'm good. But when you start to drop out of life, and I'm actually teaching, it's interesting you bring all this up. I'm actually teaching 2 Thessalonians right now at my local church. That's the point of the book.
That's the point of the book.
Because there were people that were quitting. They weren't holding down jobs. Paul calls them busybodies, because they felt that they were in the 7-year tribulation period. So Jesus is going to touch down in less than 7 years. And why save for my retirement or hold down a job or anything?
Let's bunker down. Yeah.
And you were talking about, you've seen the damage. That's the kind of damage that happens when we go beyond what's written.
Yeah. I think that, so the clarification is for me, is that I don't want to lump somebody who is even hinting or intimating something might happen this fall in the same camp as someone who's making a specific prophecy. Obviously there's a distinction. What I'm saying is that even those that are hinting it still are going to be causing damage.
Sure.
That's ultimately hey guys, it's not as wise. It's best not even to hint at it.
That's exactly right.
You know, as it relates to, now we could say, hey, could that be a stage setting thing? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Mm-hmm. But any final words you have?
No, I think this is a great conversation. It's a healthy conversation. It's something that's needed in our camp, because in our camp, we don't really have the allegorists, but we do have sensationalists. And, you know, we don't want to bury our heads in the sand and pretend like things happening in our world have no significance. There's a large sector of the body of Christ that does that, and we're not part of that. But there's another sector that ascribes too much meaning to prophetic subjects. I keep going back to this, they go beyond what's written. And we don't want to go down that road either, you know, or even hint at things that God doesn't reveal. Because of disillusionment that sets in and the discrediting of our movement.
Yeah, you know, and I'll speak from my own personal failure. And so, I mean, being excited, but then allowing that excitement and that emotion then I think I've discovered something, like maybe a connection between this or a certain number and this verse. And then my emotion is excited. And then now I have the double emotion of believing I've discovered something unique. Mm-hmm. And then I allow that to flavor my hermeneutics or my exegesis or how I interpret it. I think then I can't see it any other way, and then I'm in big trouble. Yeah. So I've done that myself, and of course I really didn't have a public ministry, but I remember one time I was so excited seeing things in the late '90s, and I was teaching a Bible study. I was a newer believer. I was teaching a high school group, and we were talking about Revelation, and they were like, "Well, Mondo, when do you think Jesus is coming? Do you think it's going to be the year 2000? I'm like, no, probably not. But I said, guaranteed by 2010, because I saw so much going on, and I don't think any of them have ever remembered. I hope they don't. But then 2010 came, and then 2015 and 20, and I'm like, I hope they have forgotten what I said back then. And I said it because I was enthusiastic. I was excited to see the Lord, but in that, still not wise, and I don't want to hurt anybody's faith and cause them to be burned out. So.
I taught a Bible study in 1989 on the Book of Revelation. And I was about 22 years old when I did it. And the only thing I can say amen to is the internet didn't exist then. And so there's no record of what I said.
What you taught back then.
So I appreciate God's grace on
Amen. Well, Dr. Woods, appreciate your time. And here we are. Thank you for listening to our podcast this week. Again, as always, you can go over to our YouTube page and see what we got. And you can check our prophecywatchers.com, see the articles that we have there. But this is an important topic, and keep watching as we are. Gary likes to say, we like to say, we are watching as Jesus told us to. So appreciate you listening this week, and we'll see you next time.